Welcome to Policy Matters Season 3, Episode 1. Policy Matters is a video chat series between Teri Talan of the McCormick Center and a guest thought leader in early childhood policy. Our guest for this season is Marica Cox Mitchell, Deputy Executive Director for Early Learning Systems for NAEYC, the National Association for the Education of Young Children. In Episode 1, Marika and Teri explored NAEYC's Power to the Profession, a national collaboration to define the early childhood profession.
Good afternoon, Marika. It is such a pleasure to have you join our policy chat series for this year. Our topic is going to be Power to the Profession and delving deeper into some of the areas that this touches on, equity issues, issues about compensation, how this work relates to leadership in the field. Today, I'm hoping that what we can do is establish a baseline for some of our folks who might be tuning into the policy chat. This might be the very first time they've heard about Power to the Profession. So I'm hoping that you can share both about what has happened so far and what's the rationale for why we need this initiative.
Any opportunity to talk about power to the profession and increase our advocacy base and ownership and have advocates informing the decisions, we absolutely value. So thanks again for this opportunity.
So tell me about when you said that there's many people involved in this initiative and you've mentioned advocates in particular, can you share a little bit about who's been involved with this initiative?
Sure. So Power to the Profession, first and foremost, focuses on the field itself, the early childhood educators themselves. So we want to ensure that decisions made about the early childhood educators' identity, their accountability, their practice are made by early childhood educators. So we provide ample opportunity for early childhood educators to inform the decisions that impact their work. We work through our affiliates, our NAEYC affiliates, as well as the affiliates of other organizations that serve on the task force. And
okay.
Speaking of the
Tell me about the task force. The task force is made up of what?
The task force is made of 15 national organizations who, like NAEYC, they represent groups of early childhood educators. So they sit at the table, the decision-making table, looking at data from the field and others to make decisions about how we structure and advance the early childhood education profession. We also have an important group. You should know this group because you're on this group, a group of stakeholder organizations. And these are organizations that have systems level influence. And so we ensure that they too are invited into the conversations so that they can inform the framework of Power to the Profession, as well as be poised to support the advocacy and implementation. So it's a very dynamic, multi-dimensional project initiative that involves many, many stakeholders, ensuring that the voice of the early childhood education professions at the table.
Yeah, and I was being a little disingenuous because I certainly know about the fact that McCormick Center is a part of the stakeholder group. And what I have appreciated is the opportunity to really provide feedback on some of the decision points that are being made and to see some of those comments or things that I've responded to actually be implemented and be a part of the next iterative cycle around various decisions that are being made about how to empower and build the profession. So maybe it's a good time to sort of talk about this decision-making cycles and what the big questions are that need to be answered or defined.
Sure, and the rationale for Power to the Profession is we all want a well-compensated profession. We all want effective early childhood educators. We all know that the diversity of the profession also impacts effectiveness. And so to get there, we need significant public funding. We cannot do it with the existing funding we have. And so to make the case for the significant public funding, we need to be very clear about who this profession is and what the public is going to get back in return. And we have not been able to do that in a very coherent manner. We have some internal conversations to have around our identity and our unique role in this field. And as a result, we see that the public too is somewhat confused about who early childhood educators really are. So first and foremost, policy of the profession is all about coherence and clarity as necessities for compensation. And so we have organized this work into multiple decision cycles. Right now we have about 8 decision cycles. They may appear to be linear, but they're highly interconnected. And so we're going to go through a series of questions and conversations with these 8 decision cycles. And in the end, by December 2018, we will then have this unifying framework that we can use to define and describe our profession, and also make this strong case for why we need significant public investments to support our work. So we have 2 draft decision cycles right now that have been informed by stakeholders, the task force, again, the profession itself. The first one is around professional identity. So who exactly are early childhood educators? And that document, the recommendations put forth is that early childhood educators, we exist as one of many professions and occupations in a wider early childhood education field. That we work with others and partner with other professions in this field, but our responsibility and our role is unique within this wider context.
And so in terms of the role of the early childhood educator, are we defining it to be birth to age 8? Those that are concerned about and involved in supporting the learning and development of children between those ages, correct?
Absolutely. So we are going to definitely use the birth through age 8 frame, and also want to point that it's all settings and sectors. So we work in all settings and sectors, supporting the learning and development of young children birth through age 8.
And when we talk about sectors, we're talking about schools and Head Start and child care and family child care.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay. And you mentioned there was a second decision cycle. What was that decision cycle about?
Sure. So having established the unique identity of the early childhood educator in the first decision cycle, the second decision cycle focused on what are the competencies that will define the early childhood education profession. As you know, we do have lots of competencies in this early childhood education space as it exists today. The competencies vary in its focus, in the population, in the depth and breadth. And so the task force is recommending that we first don't start from scratch in building competencies. We leverage the work that's already been done and use the NAEYC 2010 initial and advanced preparation standards as the foundation for creating competencies. And so the competencies that will define the early childhood education profession will first start with the NAEYC professional preparation standards with some updates. The task force clearly articulated some conditions for using that document, and is very clear about the revisions that need to be made to be able to elevate that document in that manner, and ensuring that we all are using the one set of competencies as a part of the way we're defining our work.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is really interesting about the work I've done thinking about power to the profession is comparing this work to the work that other professions have done over time. It's almost like we're trying to learn our lessons from what other professions have gone through and not make any mistakes, so we can move quickly and navigate the rapids so that we get to where we want to be in a more efficient way than maybe other professions. And I've sort of at times referenced surgeons, because I remind people that surgeons used to be barbers. And the barbers used to cut hair, would cut off arms and pull teeth and do anything that was related to, I guess, using a scissors. And it took a long time for medicine to become a profession, and surgery and surgeons to become a subspecialty. And we are kind of in those beginning stages right now with early childhood education, because frankly, people say this is taking too long. And I say, it's not nearly as long as what's happened in other professions. So I just wonder, what's your take on that? Do you feel like this process, in terms of a 2-year time frame, is doable? Obviously, it's going to take a lot more work past that 2 years. What happens after that date that you laid out?
Correct. So you are right. The 2-year time frame, for some, it's extremely aggressive. For our advocates who understand the complexity of the decision-making process of implementation times, 2 years does definitely seem, 2 years do seem jarring to have all of these conversations and this unifying framework in place. But for others who recognize that this is a long, long time coming, and we've had many, many conversations, decades of work in this space, they also find that 2 years doable. So we have to recognize that while Power to the Profession as an initiative is new, Power to the Profession certainly builds on decades of conversations around this topic. And so we're optimistic and confident that with the support of the field, the task force organizations, and the stakeholder organizations, we can definitely get to this unifying framework in 2 years. But also want to point, still learning from other professions, that this is a continuous process, that while at the end of 2 years, we're gonna have this unifying framework in place, we will always have to come back to this unifying framework and make revisions. And so this is only a start. We are committing to being like the other professions, being agile enough to respond to new research, new practices, and then always in profession.
Okay, thank you. So what so far has given you the biggest pause, or surprised you the most in doing this work so far?
I think it's just learning about other professions. We all come into this work wearing our early childhood education hats, and as we should. And we think inwardly. We look at ourselves and try to figure out how we can make this work. I think the biggest surprise has been pausing a little bit and stepping outside of our early childhood comfort zone and saying, wait a minute, how about other professions organize? Who make decisions about competencies? Who holds higher education accountable for meeting the demands of the profession? How protective are other professions around who can enter the profession and who can use the names like registered nurses or CNAs and architects? And so I think what has surprised me the most is learning from other professions, and that there are some structural components that has to guide this work, that we, as we exist today, look significantly different from how other professions are structured. And so we want to be respected as a profession. We must also look and structure ourselves like a profession, providing ample opportunity, though, for us to customize our structure and our framework in a way that reflects our unique culture and context.
Wow, that's very helpful. And I'm sure you're documenting the process as you go along, not just achieving our goal, but thinking about what this process looks like and how we can continually reflect back on it. So I think this is good for our first session. I'm hoping that there will be people who will respond to this policy chat with questions for you, for me, things that we should consider in our following policy chats, because this is really all about us It's about everybody in this work working together to make this profession exactly what it needs to be internally and recognized externally. So I want to just thank you for all the hard work you're doing, Marica, and for agreeing to participate with us in this policy chat series. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for this opportunity.
Thanks to Marica for joining us, and thanks to you for watching. Join the conversation with Teri and Marica in person at Leadership Connections National Conference. In the meantime, what questions do you have about Power to the Profession? Tell us in the comments section below. Until next time.